Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we're talking about The Passenger.
Yes.
By Michelangelo Antonioni.
Yes, 1975.
From 1975. Not the Iggy Pop song. It predates the song by 2 years. I'd never seen an Antonioni film before.
I spent most of the summer looking at his films in chronological order, though in fact I didn't reach The Passenger.
Right.
Because basically, your summer leave ends before. And what I had done is, I think Mubi showed Chronicle of a Love Affair, and I loved it so much that I just kind of got obsessed, really. And I had taught La Ventura previously, and I had seen, I suppose, the great 60s classics, right? So La Ventura, La Notte, Blow Up, yeah. So those I'd seen, I had loved La Ventura, but I had never seen his 50s films, yeah. And I kind of became obsessed, really. I think, and actually I would argue that those are the films of his that I love most, kind of the ones that people kind of write off because, they're his most conventional. Cronica di un amore, La Dama senza camellie, The Lady Without Camellias, which is about filmmaking itself and which I just adore. In fact, I loved it so much. It was shown on Mubi, and I loved it so much that I decided to start my film criticism module this year by showing it. I became also kind of obsessed with the star of those films. It was Lucia José, who's kind of incredibly beautiful. She looks like Garbo, really, but she's Italian. She worked on Spanish cinema as well. So actually, kind of, that screening on Mubi led to various strands of obsession, really. So I kind of, I looked at Antonioni films, I looked at the films of Lucia José. Lucia José appeared in Juan Antonio Bardem's film. And so I went through Juan Antonio Bardem's films. Death of a Cyclist is the one that she appears in. So, it was kind of like a fantastic summer that way. And then I went back over, so I'd spend like about a week on each film, and I was just gobsmacked by Il Grido, the shout, which is about this man who goes on the road and he has all these adventures, and he returns home and throws himself off a tower. Really? Yeah. But it's very beautiful and kind of very powerful. It's kind of melodramatic as well, but each shot is really measured. Antonioni's films are so beautiful because his use of space is so extraordinary. Like, every shot counts and every shot is meaningful, and often they're kind of in long takes where you're kind of conscious of the relations of things and people, within that space and how they change over the time of the shot. It was really an extraordinary experience to watch them, and some of them I watched obsessively, actually.
So what would you say, what do you think ties his films together, or what are the...
Well, for me, I mean, he is really the filmmaker of post-war existential dilemmas.
Okay.
Kind of. So.
Well, The Passenger fits quite nicely into that.
It does, very much indeed. It's part of that whole thematic, kind of, his films are all, I would say, like, kind of almost like Heidegger. They're all about being and nothingness, and kind of the short kind of slide between one and the other, right? Kind of, so for example, in The Lady Without Camellias, it's about this woman who wants to be a film star. She marries this producer, who wants her to be a sex bomb, but then he marries her and wants her to be like a great actress, and she's not a great actress, and at the end kind of, you know, everything that her husband didn't want to be, you know, is what she's reduced to being. And as soon as she wants to learn how to be a great actress and so on, all the choices are taken away from her. Right. So the film ends on this close-up of despair, right? El Grido ends up on suicide, you know, yeah, etc., etc. You know, it's kind of, it's the really beautiful, the really formally beautiful. So I was very drawn to them. It's very interesting because actually The Passenger is a film that I feel I want to see again, because it's one of those films that grows in your mind. Even though the experience of watching it, I was underwhelmed, right?
Yeah, you were. I really enjoyed it. We saw this at the BFI South Bank on the Saturday after we left the clock a little early. We decided already to spend our afternoon watching this and watching a Swedish film called Hexen, which we'll talk about on a different podcast. And I thought it was a great use of an afternoon, to be honest. I mean, I really enjoyed both of them. I really enjoyed The Passenger. Didn't know what to expect of it. Not just because I hadn't seen Antonioni, but because I didn't know anything about it. It was just, it was on, so let's go and see it. So the film is Jack Nicholson plays David Locke, who is he's supposed to be born in England but brought up and educated in America, which is why he sounds like Jack Nicholson. But so he's English American. He's a journalist, and he's in North Africa following some kind of rebels in a
war.
In a sort of civil war you don't know all that much about, but you get kind of glimpses of what interviews that he's been doing and that sort of thing. But that's in the background, really. That's not the point of the film. And there's an English guy staying at his hotel, who actually he's kind of struck up a bit of a friendship with. He returns to his hotel at the start of the film to find out that this guy's died of a heart attack. No one else knows it. No one's been into his room. So he jumps at the opportunity to take his identity, assume his identity, switch their passports, switch the photos in the passports, and leave his life.
Yes.
Leave his wife, pretend he's dead, you know, and just go off. Go off with the guy's belongings, the guy's sort of notebook and things, appointments book. The guy's called Robertson. He kind of subsequently discovers that Robertson is actually a gun runner for these rebels that he was sort of doing a report on. So he's kind of slightly finds himself dumped into a situation he wasn't prepared for. But again, like that is not quite the point of the film, you know. So in another film, this would be, you can imagine this being like a Man on the Run type of, oh my god, what am I in?
It's got a great suspense plot that it doesn't treat suspensefully at all.
Exactly. It's about the guy's existential crisis. It's about his life and where he wants to go with it. And the fact that he's now kind of a target for various powerful people, dangerous people, is it's kind of muted. I think it's interesting. Spoilers, I guess, will come up, but it is a film from 1975.
Yes.
He meets a girl in Barcelona,
played by Maria Schneider,
who, you don't get her name actually. She's an architecture student, but she's just she's a little bit of a free spirit. As I said on Facebook, she's kind of she seems to be like the earliest Manic Pixie Dream Girl that I've seen. The girl who's a free spirit who kind of gives the guy something to, changes his life, or gives him something to think about, or whatever.
Yes.
She has an element of that. They kind of strike up a bit of a relationship. She joins him as his passenger on his various meandering travels across Europe. Ultimately, at a hotel in Spain, he is found and assassinated. But you don't quite see that. It's an interesting shot right at the end of the film. You've also got his wife and the production crew kind of trying to track him down as well.
Yes.
So that's the kind of setup. I can see what you mean when you talk about Antonioni being kind of careful and precise, and also his use of long takes. What you said about his long takes giving you a sense of the orchestration of space. There is one in particular. I'm not going to talk about the one at the end.
No.
As much as, well, not yet at least. As much as I think it's fantastic.
It's fantastic.
But there's one in the first third of the film where Nicholson has found Robertson's body, and he's kind of deciding to take over his identity. And he sat at a desk with the passports in front of him, and he's listening to a tape of an interview that he's done with Nicholson, with Robertson, and the camera tracks away from Nicholson at the desk out to the open window in the balcony where Robertson is standing. So the present time turns into the past in one shot, and then Nicholson, in his past form, joins Robertson and they chat. And then the camera moves back, and Nicholson again is at the desk. So obviously what's happened is he's run around, put some clothes on, and then come back.
That's amazing. I didn't notice that.
It's a flashback in one take.
Right.
It's fantastic. And so not only are you kind of aware of the physical space of the room and how you move from the desk to the thing, but it changes time in one take, which I think is amazing. It's beautiful and really subtle, and it has a kind of ethos of, if we don't need to cut, then let's not.
Yes.
If we can do this with a camera move, let's do it. Let's keep it neat and composed. And there's another element. There's like something else happens again. It's in the same sort of. It's the same act of the film where he's kind of investigating the death. You see a shot. The shot begins on the ceiling fan whirring round. It's incredibly hot, and you're in North Africa, right? And so the shot begins on the ceiling fan, and then it pans down to see Nicholson, and you kind of think that like that's what the shot will be. You'll just end up on Nicholson, but he does some stuff, and then the camera moves back up to the fan. Actually, no, I'm terribly sorry. It's the other way around. It starts off when Nicholson moves up to the fan, and you think, oh, the shot's going to end. It'll cut to something else, but then it moves back to Nicholson. I just think like that. There's something interesting about how the film, it's like the attention of the camera at that point is distracted. It's like the camera is too hot and needs to cool down. Do you know what I mean? The camera kind of lives in the world. There's such an awful long time in the film where very little happens. And what I mean by that is not that there's kind of no plot, but just it takes a very long time. It allows you a lot of time to investigate the room along with Nicholson. It gives you a very long time to kind of dig his jeep out of the sand, that sort of thing. He ended up giving up on that, but like the film gives you such a long time to sink into its world.
Yes,
with these
and
little
sink
details.
into its rhythms.
Yes,
because actually it's very leisurely. So. But again, I
can sense you sort of found that boring. I found it actually quite engrossing.
I didn't find it boring. Okay. So, I did. I mean, I was looking at my watch actually. So I was thinking, do you need all of this to convey that? Is it being self-indulgent and so on? And again, I feel kind of a bit of, a disjunctive response, because my immediate response to the film as I was watching it was, it's self-indulgent and it's dull, right? And then kind of subsequently, and I haven't made a project of thinking about it actually, it just kind of crops up in your mind and you begin to be interested in things that you saw.
Yeah. So,
I think I've had a delayed response to the film.
That, yeah.
I mean, in a weird way, well, maybe not a weird way, but, when watching it, what interested me most was the scenes in Spain. And that's just for obvious, biographical reasons, right? I was very fascinated by all of the scenes in Barcelona. And, my thoughts were just autobiographical. I mean, I think, I was in Spain at that age, and I was 13 and the streets were like that and people were quite poor, right? And kind of, some of the dialogue that you overhear, it has attitudes like there's, in the last shot that you will talk about later, there's a scene where, an old man calls a child a cabron, like a bastard, you little bastard, So kind of, you're watching kind of all of these scenes and this way of life and, and the beauty of all the Gaudi stuff, right? Which the Jack
he
Nicholson
kind of meets
character.
up with Maria Schneider on the roof of a Gaudi building.
And he's completely unaware of the significance of it or the history of it. I mean, he probably doesn't even know who Gaudi was, right? But in the meantime, they're on the roof of this amazing, building, right, in Paseo de la Gracia, and it's just extraordinarily beautiful to see. And actually, Antonioni does know what the character doesn't, So as they're going up the stairs, he is leisurely letting all of, the doorways, which are all kind of curved and oddly shaped and so on. He's letting all of that kind of sink into you, really. And, what I was thinking was, you'd never be able to see that building like they did, because now there would be like 1 million people in queue, to get into the house. And, so kind of my whole thinking about it was actually almost like extra filmic, really, but I loved all of those scenes. But I was thinking more about things like the setting and the decor and the way of life in Spain in a particular historical period than about, the existential dilemma of the protagonist.
Yeah. Yeah, I can certainly see that. That's kind of fair enough. I think it might be dependent on mood as well. I'm not saying you were in the wrong mood for it or anything. That's but I'm saying I can imagine that if I had been in a different mood, I might have found it much less interesting, much more indulgent.
I was very delighted that you liked it, because I had feared that it was almost exactly the kind of film that I could imagine you absolutely hating.
Really?
Well, yes. Yeah. I mean, it's a philosophical existential film, about being, about kind of, letting go of identities, about becoming about literally shedding your skin and becoming someone else. And it's kind of filmed at a very leisurely pace.
Very leisurely pace.
So I would have thought that's exactly the kind of film you would almost have a knee-jerk, I hate reaction.
I suppose it's possible. I can sympathise with why you think that. I think what interested me about it wasn't so much the kind of the meditation on identity and kind of who you want to be or who you'd like to escape from being and stuff, but it was the filmmaking, it was the orchestration of the action and the movement within the frame, and also Jack Nicholson's performance. I think he's incredible to look at. One thing, I think this is the earliest Nicholson performance that I've seen.
Yes.
Other than that little bit he did in was it Little Shop of Horrors or whatever? Where he's
actually, let me mention two things about Nicholson which are completely superficial, but which I think must be said. First, he looks extraordinarily beautiful in this, and he's filmed as a movie star. Kind of you see the fleshiness of his lips, and you see him with his shades, and he's very thin, and he's got a nude scene where he's got a great butt, and it's kind of, the clothing and so on showcase it, right? So I think kind of, kudos for Antonioni to make advantage of that. And kudos to Nicholson, because, the idea of, a major film star. I mean, in 1975, there couldn't have been bigger film stars than Nicholson in American cinema, right? For an American film star, at the height of his career...
So what year was Chinatown?
Chinatown was 73, 74.
I've seen Chinatown, but... Go on.
Well, I mean, he's had a huge run from Easy Rider, 5 Easy Pieces, The Last Detail, Chinatown. It was hit after hit after hit, right? So for him to go make a film in Europe with Antonioni, that's the kind of thing only television stars did, or people on, I forget the name of the star of El Grido, but, people on the downslide of their careers would go make films in Europe in those days, right? But, somebody at the height of his career wouldn't go, except it's Antonioni, So obviously, kind of, Nicholson was drawn to make a film with, one of the geniuses of filmmaking, and very lucky we are, that he did, really, because I think the film is enriched by having Nicholson.
He's fantastic in it. I think he's completely in control of every scene, and he's quite witty. I mean, he makes jokes out of certain things, like his responses to when he meets up with the gun guys in that church, and they give him an envelope full of money. He says Jesus Christ, and then says, "Oh, sorry," and he sells it really nicely, and he has this kind of downplayed sort of knowing wit about himself, But I don't know. He really captured me, the way his frustration with the way things are going with his life, and the kind of opportunism. You know, I mean, it's quite a serious thing to fake your death and steal a man's identity,
Yes.
but you
And
understand him completely and believe him.
And to go into the unknown, right? Because so it's not just that Nicholson, what's his character's name?
Locke.
Yeah, it's not just that Locke leaves his identity; it's that he's also going into the unknown, right? So it's like this extraordinary dissatisfaction with who he is, with know, his being, right? So and then it's not quite a becoming, because it's not just he's not just growing into something else; he's growing into someone else, or he's choosing the identity of someone else whom he doesn't know, right? And actually, that becomes part of the dilemma of the film, that he doesn't know what he's getting into. So he's going into the unknown, but as someone other than himself.
But also the dissatisfaction that leads him to do that. You can imagine how a lesser director and a lesser actor would have done that with a load of maudlin looks, being depressed all over the place. And that's not who Nicholson's character is.
Yes.
Locke isn't like that. You do understand what he's fed up with, I think. You understand that he is fed up, and you feel it. But it's not sort of... it's not stale or stagnant the way that it's conveyed. I can't think how to kind of better describe it. Again, it's something that I think you sink into. You feel the character, and you kind of get him, I think. And in a similar way, I think although she's given less of a character, I think you get Maria Schneider's character.
Oh, very much so,
You know, in a similar way, like you kind of get why she would go with this guy who she's just met to just go on a trip. Yeah. There's a sense of adventure in it for her. She's a little bit livelier than he is.
Yes.
But
and she knows what she's getting into. She knows the risk.
Yeah.
And she often kind of confronts the police, or cheats the police, or
and she speaks the language and he doesn't, and she takes care of things for him. She knows how to play the game.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I loved all that. I just want to say before moving on that the person who I was thinking of in El Grido is Steve Cochran.
Right.
Yeah. Do you recognize Steve?
I don't know the name.
Exactly. That's my point. Right. So, he'd been like, a semi-star of American cinema, mainly in supporting roles. So, he would go to Europe and do El Grido, right? But, to have a major American film star kind of do a European film was very unusual. I mean, don't get me wrong, in the 70s, a few more people did it. So I think Goldie Hawn went and made a film in Italy. I think Dustin Hoffman also went and made a film in Italy with lesser directors. Candice Bergen did a film with Lena Wertmuller. So there was an element, there was a fashion for going and working with auteurs, but it was very unusual when Jack Nicholson did it, and also given Jack Nicholson's stardom. So it's kind of like an interesting intersection. The other thing I'd also like to mention is that amongst the writing credits is Peter Woolen, right? Yes. Who's kind of one of the founding kind of film theorists. He wrote Signs and Meaning in the Cinema, kind of a film about semiotics in film. So that you have like a theorist writing the screenplay, Antonioni directing, Jack Nicholson and Maria Schneider starring. Maria Schneider fresh off Last Tango in Paris. So it's kind of like a very, very fascinating kind of mixture.
Was that Tango in Paris before this? Yeah, 1972. Hush My Mouth. Yeah. I think I like how well matched they are, and you also get a sense of the characters, I think, connect well. You can sense that they fit. Not only do you get that shot where they're lying in bed together and you see the shape of their bodies and cast in the light, which is beautiful, and you get a real feeling of just it feels right, But there's that wonderful bit where they're sat outside a cafe and he's explaining, because his behaviour's been kind of erratic at this point, and he's explaining, this is what's happened. This guy died and I've taken his identity and faked my death, and she's kind of not fazed by it. Yes. Which is fantastic. So at one point, I've got the script up here. He says, "Now I think I'm going to be a waiter in Gibraltar." He says in this kind of deadpan, ironic way, yes. And she's just not fazed. She says, "Too obvious."
Yes, I remember.
Wonderful, and it's a great bit. Like so he kind of has his wit, and she matches it.
Yeah.
She just doesn't. She's not. It's wonderful the way they start to play off each other, because it's not like the film doesn't play it as like a meeting of perfect. Kind of like he still says like you shouldn't be here. This is too dangerous. And at that point towards the end where she's booked the room, him thinking that he's kind of managed to discard her, but she's turned up nonetheless. So they clash, but there is a feeling of like this is why I think I kind of thought of like a Manic Pixie Dream Girl thing of like she kind of activates him in a way, or there's a sense of disconnection with his character. I think the fact that he's basically an American married to quite a posh English woman living in England, like of her side you see all of his like TV crew and whatever production staff, and they're all English guys, so he's not the same as them. Despite the film tells you English American, but I mean that in itself is kind of that's a disconnected kind of place to be. He lives between cultures in a way. You don't feel like he's attached to one or the other. He lives between them, and then at the same time you don't see him in England or America at any point. You see he's just in North Africa and Europe throughout the whole film.
Well,
so he's
you
displaced
see
the whole
him
time.
in London, and in fact that's the place.
London?
Yes, you do see him in London, and that's the place where he first sees Maria Schneider. It's actually it's quite famous. It's where I think it's the Renoir cinemas are now. It's that kind of new housing estate with.
Yes, so he goes home, doesn't he? I forget. That's right. He goes home and picks up a couple of things.
Yes,
that's right. I forgot that. And then he goes back off to Europe.
But let's talk about.
But the point is, he's a displaced person basically throughout.
Yes, he is.
I mean, the only time he goes home is to leave.
Yes. Let's talk about the amazing shot at the end.
Yeah, so I noticed this. Did you notice while it was happening that it was a long day?
I did.
It's something you become conscious of. He lies down in bed in this hotel, and the shot is composed of him. He's lying down horizontally, so his head's at the bottom left of the frame, his feet are sort of in the middle, and you're looking. So his bed's on the bottom left, and you're looking through the bars of his window, and through them, there's basically like a plaza. You said it's a bullfighting arena. You recognise.
There's a bullfighting arena in the background.
Yeah, so I didn't recognise that it was a bullfighting arena.
Yes, it's curved and the
right.
architecture and so on.
So that's what you're seeing across this plaza, and just sitting on the wall beside that bullfighting arena is an old fella, just on a chair, and there's just a little bit of activity, not very much. It's basically very sparse. It's Spain. It's middle of summer. It's incredibly hot, arid.
There's a child playing.
There's a kid playing. The kid kind of kicks the ball, and the guy tells him to fuck off.
Yes.
And the shot very, very gradually tracks in to the window, and it's constantly keeping things geometrically aligned between the bars. Just about like obviously people move between them, but they always seem to line up very nicely between the bars.
It reminded me. Sorry to interrupt a little bit. But it reminded me a little bit of Michael Snow's Wavelength, right?
I've not seen that.
Well, it's the camera moving in on a painting, I think. Yeah, and it does so very slowly, right? And, as it's doing so, you're conscious of time, you're conscious about what you're seeing, you're conscious about the changes of what you're seeing, and that shot reminded me a little bit about a mini version of that.
Yeah. And there's a kind of shot where, again, I think if you're not in the right mood for the film, you probably go, "Oh, this is interminable," because nothing's really happening. It is about the length of time things are taking, and it is about kind of wondering what will happen or wondering what you're supposed to be seeing. Maybe like the shot at the end of Cachet as well. Like there's no real direction to anything. You're just seeing life, and the whole thing about that shot in Cachet is if you know what you're meant to be looking for, you see it. I don't think that's quite what's going on here. It's not like it's not hiding anything.
Yes,
but it has that same feeling of just kind of being lost in spending a lot of time in this place, and as the camera gets closer and closer and closer to the bars, you start to wonder where the shot's going to end.
Yes,
and it gets right up close to them, and then moves through them.
Yes,
obviously however they've done it, they've kind of removed the bars, and they've had someone on the other side ready to receive the camera to take it out, and then so you think, oh god, they've moved out, and then the camera actually rotates, so you realise you've moved from inside the room to outside the room. You turn around and eventually you actually look back at the room, and you see Nicholson's body. You hear a gunshot at one point, and that's his assassination has taken place.
And you also see through the window the black man arriving in a car.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah, you see a car arrive and pull up.
And that's the same person who he's taken money from an arms deal.
That was the church earlier.
Yeah, that he doesn't quite know. Yeah,
exactly.
So he's taking on this identity. You know, he's going through the motions of what being that person is, but he's not aware of all the implications of it.
Exactly. And ultimately this film ends with his death, and everything is orchestrated into this one shot. So you have the guy arrive, you hear off screen his murder. You see the girl Maria Schneider outside, out about, kind of wandering around, and you see a police van arrive. Locke's wife and I think his producer turn up because she has now worked out by this point that he's alive and has taken someone's identity. She's figured that out, so she's tracked him down too. And as the camera eventually turns round and looks back into the room from outside, you see them enter. So there's the hotel manager, Locke's wife, the girl, and she says, "I don't know who this guy is. Never seen him before." The girl identifies the guy. She identifies Locke as Robertson, his assumed identity, and the film ends. And so, like, it's like they conspire to kind of help him disappear after his death. Weirdly, and there is a sense of kind of foreboding. Foreboding is probably too far because it's not like it's ominous. The shot, at least not at the start, but there is a sense of finality to it. The film has started off very slowly. It's moved in the middle to kind of more action, where it's not an action movie, but it does move into a space where things are actually happening, and he's having to kind of evade people or move around the country. But at the end, I mean, when someone just lies down on a bed and the shot takes a while to look at nothing, you get a sense of finality, right? So I don't know if you thought I don't know when maybe you picked up on the thought that, he's going to die now. Did you think of that at all?
I didn't think of it until I saw him on the bed.
Yeah. Which is the start of that shot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I agree. You somehow the film has just conveyed this feeling of it ends now.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Like, it's kind of like, is it what he wants? Is it what he's aiming for? Like, he wants to escape the life that he had. That doesn't necessarily mean he wanted to die.
Yes.
But on the other hand, you don't feel, maybe there isn't enough of his character that you feel a sense of sadness to it, or maybe it felt like it was in the stars that this was going to happen at some point. There's like an acceptance to it.
Well, I mean, I think his job was one of being a reporter, right? Which was always kind of observing and commenting and being objective. And then he fully embodies somebody else. But I suppose fully embodies is the wrong term. He embodies because he can't fully embody because he actually doesn't know. He's not in the timeline. Yeah. So he doesn't know what arrangements have been made. He only knows that arrangements have been made. Right? Like, he doesn't know the implications of them.
Yeah, he's going to meet up with these people that are in his notebook. Yeah. He just knows, I've got to go here at a certain time.
So he's not fully himself, and he's not fully the person whose identity
he lives as a ghost, doesn't he? He's died. Yeah. He fakes his death, and he is now a dead person.
Yes.
And like, he dies twice.
Yes.
Mind you, so does the other guy in a way, because he dies as Robertson at the end as well.
Yes.
But there is a sense throughout the entire film. There's a slightly spectral feeling.
Yes.
Which is then embodied by that final shot.
Yes.
Where there's such a lack of activity.
Yes. Which is an interesting, I think, also philosophical commentary, really. I mean, again, what is being? Kind of, what is life? What is identity? Kind of. Yeah. I think the film does.
It's like the grass is always greener. that's kind of glib. That's kind of glib. But what I mean is, like, you kind of he wants to run from the life that he has and the person who he is.
I don't even say run is too much excitement.
Okay, but he wants to escape the life that he has and the person who he is. But then actually in doing so, he discovers that he ends up with nothing. It's not like he can become someone else. He just loses who he was.
Well, But the thing is that taking on that other identity also gives him opportunity to be who he wants to be. You know, kind of. There's all these intimations that, you know, the person whose identity he takes on, Robertson, is engaged in an important cause, right? That, you know, he's not just like a gun runner for money. He's kind of supporting a revolution that's something he believes in, or at least that's what we're told. There's elements of doubt about all that. He could just be in it for the money, you know. But it is kind of, the identity is giving the character an opportunity of fully being alive. But actually, he doesn't know what he's being alive to. He's always kind of like discovering, and some of the discoveries are very disconcerting, right? You know, the moment where he receives the money, he's shocked that it's that amount of money, right? And he takes it, you know, and he doesn't fully think through the implications of what receiving that amount of money, what he's got to do in return, right? You know, so I think kind of the film is I find it very fascinating to think about, kind of almost on a philosophical level, about, you know, kind of questions of being. So
it's certainly up for interpretation, because you know, I clearly kind of, I think we see it differently. I think both, and I think fairly, you know. Like I
So how do you differ from what I'm
so what I saw about, so as I said, kind of what I saw was an inability to grasp an identity once he's kind of killed himself.
Yes. Well, I would agree with that.
As opposed to kind of, so what you say about kind of the opportunity that being someone else affords, kind of the film puts him in a place where he how to put it, like, he just ends up somewhere very dangerous, and he can't become someone else. You know, he doesn't know who he's becoming. I think it's important that the girl that he meets doesn't have a name.
Yeah.
You know, maybe that's kind of why they match so well. Is she doesn't have an identity either.
Yes.
You know, that's why she's so free to just up and move with him.
Yes. Yes.
You know?
No, I think that's interesting. That's great. But I do think that the new identity, in some ways, offers him the opportunity of being more fully alive than he's felt before.
Yeah, no, that's true as well, isn't it? I think you could also imagine how, like, his life moves into. You could imagine how it would almost be done as like a Bourne thing. Like, all of a sudden he's thrust into a world where he's a gun runner. You know, and like, you can imagine a version of this film, a very exciting one, where it suddenly becomes a thriller.
Yes.
You know, like you know, Hitchcock.
Yes.
We're at North by Northwest.
Yes.
You know, mistaken identity, and now is a man out of place, and he's thrust into a very exciting world.
It's exciting and sexy and
right.
You know, dangerous, but the hero overcomes. This is like
all
the
ingredients are there.
Yeah.
The ingredients are there, but the recipe is not, like, it's very, very different. It makes something very different of it.
Yes.
So I think is interesting.
Yes.
And I don't know.
Anyway, it's a film to see again.
I find it deeply engrossing.
Yes. Yes, I found it less engrossing, but very enriching. You know, I mean, I think there's a multitude of viewing experiences, right? There are films that you enjoy them from the beginning, and then they die on you as soon as you leave the cinema. You know, and there are films that you're kind of slightly dulled by or whatever, or, you know, you're looking at them in kind of different ways or whatever, and then they kind of nudge you, and and I think this is a film that's nudged me, right? That kind of, you know, you're trying to fall asleep and you think of a scene in the film, or you think of a shot, or, you know, you think of a reaction, and it really stays with you, and it actually makes you really want to talk about it, right? Like that there are things in the film that feel at the moment beyond my grasp, right? And that you want to revisit, you know, and I think kind of that's one of those films for me.
You let it breathe and it lives with you. And I think, you know, this is one of those times when had we done the podcast the evening that we saw the film, it would have been less productive than having left it a few days and given it time to percolate. Yes. But as you say, the film has aged like a fine wine over the last 4 days.
Okay, well, that's a wonderful note to end on. So thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are at
iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube to listen to. On social media, we're at Eavesdrop Movies on Twitter, and we're Eavesdropping at the Movies on Facebook. And the website with all the podcasts is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much for listening.
Goodbye.